Good morning, everyone. Let's get your show started. Business Morning, live here on Channels Television. I am Bosin Omofai. We welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Nigeria's Federal Inland Revenue Service took to the Twitter over the last couple of hours, denying reports yesterday that the agency planned increase in payable value-added tax from the current 5% to 7.25%. The agency says in a number of tweets that what it plans was rather a pledge to increase the naira value of collectible VAT, which stood at 1.1 trillion naira last year and had been rising steadily, at least by 25% over the past 3 years. The agency says there's no plan to increase VAT from the current 5% to 7.2, or at least by 58%, saying those reports were inaccurate. The FRS highlighted high incidences, however, of collected but not remitted VAT by companies in the private sector, and says a measure of whistleblower program has been put in place to encourage consumers to report on companies that are collecting VAT without remitting them to the authorities. The FRS also clarifies that it's in talks with the Ministry of Finance looking to lower tax rates for small businesses in order to stimulate this sector's growth. Company income tax is about 30% at the moment. The FRS says it's in talks with the Federal Ministry of Finance to see if this could be shaved to 20% for small businesses to help them improve their growth levels. So this is one big news. The Airtel Nigeria is eyeing plans over the last couple of years by one of its main rival, MTN, to list on the stock exchange. So, media reports that Airtel may have opened talks with the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the SEC, and other agencies for a possible listing by introduction on the Nigerian Stock Exchange in the first half of 2019. If you know the history of Airtel very well, over the last nearly 20 years, in particular, when it was Econet Nigeria, and you remember that Airtel, this is not the first time the company has been planning to list on the stock exchange. It went all the way back since the early days of Econet Nigeria. We'll talk about that if this Airtel discussion with the stock exchange and the SEC sees the light of day. Meantime, MTN Nigeria is also planning a similar listing on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, of course, which may include an initial share offerings after the initial listing by introduction. All that will be part of what the market, of course, the stock market will be very excited about. I'm sure Temple Ashaju will be looking to see how this news of Airtel opening talks with Stock Exchange and the SEC for a possible, at least listing by introduction, to tee off listings by big telcos on our local bourse. Let's bring in Temple Ashaju here into the discussion. Morning, Temple, taking you into this conversation and getting yesterday's market into the entire mix. This is going to be one big story for the Nigerian market. But if you check in first, the market is currently it tied a little bit yesterday, despite the big news around Access Bank and the merger with Diamond Bank, the conclusion of those approvals, regulatory approvals that are required, and the NSE placing Diamond Bank on a full trading suspension until the end of the merger and eventual delisting of Diamond Bank as a quoted company. Access Bank wrote that yesterday. That lifted the banking sector a little bit, but the general market mood was negative. So we finished off a bit tepid, about 0.14% on the all-share index. Look at the primary numbers. Temple's getting his acts together to come get in here on the show. Let's give you the numbers as it were. We're still holding around the 31,000 level. If nothing very strong happens today, we might see a dip below that. But yesterday we finished off around 31,040 on the composite index. Again, the consumer goods and industries keep looking for a way to hold the market from breaking down as strongly as the level as we see it. But according to some data, the market has lost more than 5% in the past few weeks. So it's been a very bearish a sentiment for the Nigerian stocks as we look at those numbers in bold red right now. Let's just flip that over, folks. I think we're done with that. Bring the second one. Let's see. Okay, that's in terms of your daily transaction numbers. These were primary market indicators, largely in tune with what you can call a daily average of volume, value, and deals. If you throw that away as well and go to the five key sectors we track, you find 2 green shoots and 3 in the red. Consumer goods and industrial goods went in the same direction. Again, Nestle went down on the ticker tip on Wednesday. Insurance lost 0.5%. A number of earnings from that sector is still hanging out there. We're yet to have them in. Banking sector gave us about 1%, of course, on the back of the Access Bank and Diamond Bank business combination. But that was a green shoot we had there. But consumer and industrials took that shine off the banking sector. So we finished off in the negative territory. Then you had the oil and gas, 0.62% to end your day. But let's move on and look at the oil and gas a little bit. Not much of a what they call plenty of stories around the oil and gas. A lot of earnings still hanging out there. But you find Mobil or Double One PLC giving that sector a green shoot, while Owendo was down 4.27% on a very, very strong volume. And it looks like the NESD over-the-counter market. Let's just move that on quickly and look at the unlisted securities market. Investors booked some profit in those on the NESD over-the-counter USI. That's the unlisted securities index, 1.41%. We saw 2 back-to-back sessions, very strong rally, but that was taken back yesterday a little bit. Booked a bit of profit there by investors, and that finished off by those numbers you're seeing there. Those were the trading numbers. Let's throw that away, or just push it aside, sorry, and then go to your fixed income space, where secondary trading was really active on our third trading day. That's your treasury bills there, where a lot of activities are very, very strong. With your discount high there, you can see the yields there. We'll be tracking those the yield curve around the treasury bills and what's the FX play in that in the trading directions that we see currently. But this is going to be a big story. Let's get on this conversation and look at the commodities side of things a little bit. This is the big story around the Senate passing the new 30,000 minimum wage. And that will have consequences for everyone. It's coming at a time when global oil prices also breaching a new high in the new year. That's almost 3 months old. Nasike Mwajide from FDC is here this morning. Thank you. Good morning. Let's hit the ground running. Take us through your burning economic issues, and I'm sure the 30,000 naira minimum wage is on everybody's lips.
Yes, it is. The Senate has passed the 30,000 naira new national minimum wage. The executive proposed 27,000 earlier, so this is higher than what it's expected. But hopefully, it passes it as soon as possible. Now, 30,000 naira is about 67% higher than what the minimum wage was before, 18,000 naira. So people at the bottom of the pyramid who used to earn 18,000 naira would earn 30,000. So, I mean, as you go up that pyramid, as you higher up that pyramid, people would earn more. The concern is how the government intends to fund this. The FIRS has come out to debunk any news about it increasing VAT from 5% to 7.5%. It's also noteworthy that Nigeria has one of the lowest VAT rates in the world at 5%. So it would need, at this point, we need to be much more efficient in tax collection, widening the VAT net, widening the tax net, as it were. I mean, 30,000 naira, there will be that boost to aggregate demand and hopefully aggregate output as a consequence of that. And people are more or less averse to taxation when the economy is growing, output is more, so people will be less averse to taxation. So hopefully it has that multiplier effect on output and on taxation. Yeah. Okay,
if you look at that list, yes, the 30,000 will be a big story. But again, if you look at these are a bit of internal issues we need to deal with. But again, if you look at some externalities, the U.S. Fed just decided to leave rates unchanged. Jerome Powell actually caught almost everyone unawares when he says there's no likely to be any hike this year. So that takes us to this week, or next week, sorry, when we're just about 2 days done. And then the MPC will be sitting. Will this be a major thing for the MPC to look into?
Yes, now markets all over the world had initially taken into consideration the fact that the Fed, as at late last year, said it would raise rates twice this year. So now we're looking at no possibility.
Off the table?
That's completely off the table. So what that does, of recent, U.S. announced it had a record trade deficit at a time when it was literally in a trade war with China. And that's because the dollar has strengthened. The dollar has strengthened. U.S. exports have been more expensive. So at this point, when we know for sure that there will be no rate hikes this year, the dollar is probably most likely going to weaken. A weaker dollar is good for oil, good for any dollar-denominated commodity, and that's oil, LNG, most of our exports, if not all of our exports, basically. And the MPC would take that into consideration, given that as markets in the U.S., the stock market especially, there will be no rate hikes. The markets will be buoyed by news of so we might see flows heading back
into the US,
which may roil markets here as well.
That's not too much of a good news for emerging and frontier markets.
The MPC will take a lot of things into consideration. We have reserves that have been rising. We have inflation that has slowed. Then there's the possible impact, the very likely impact of the 30,000 minimum wage on inflation. They'll keep an eye on that. The currency has been stable this past week, such that the MPC and obviously increased liquidity as the 30,000 naira minimum takes effect. So a lot of things, MPC will be looking at all these variables, but I think they're more likely to keep rates steady and continue to observe, in my opinion.
What you folks believe the stock market also has a bearing for consumers one way or the other, whether you like it or not, because you have some of the big names there.
Yes.
Either in consumer goods or industrials, of course, banks.
Yes, obviously. As it is, it's lost about 5% in the last 4 weeks. I think the FPI outflows that we saw before the election, some of these outflows are yet to return, and with the news of stock, U.S. Fed keeping rates steady so far, it's not exactly good news. But we'll wait and see. Hopefully. Well, consumer goods, like you said, I mean, with increased minimum wage, people likely to spend more, and this is good news for the consumer goods.
When salaries go high, one of the things that consumers hit is what you call the agri products market. Yes. So let's check with market. Yeah, we tend to eat more, drink more, and a bit more happier. The latest World Happiest Countries reports just came out. So it was maybe with this 30,000 minimum wage.
Go up that list.
Yeah, we should be going up on our ranking as one of the happiest countries in the world. But again, that brings us to checking with with your market survey and look at some of the products as we get to the middle of the month. Again, salaries will start getting paid from next week or so. Yes, Monday's 25th. So that week. We'll see. So do you think this will have any impact on this, or you think these market prices will start being tweaked?
I think
just as the news that the Senate has passed the 30,000, Mr. President will still have to sign off on it.
Mr. President will still need to sign off on that. Oh. I think at the moment...
I don't want to get too happy.
Yes.
Until I see Mr. President's signature.
We hope he signs as soon as possible. At the moment, the market last month, or early this month, as a result of the postponement of the elections, and there was a bit of panic buying before each election weekend. So prices went up a bit. So that should have stabilized by now, basically. So we see prices being stable. I mean, even we see inflation has fallen for 2 consecutive months. It doesn't mean that prices are falling. It's just that ordinary prices rise, but not as quickly as they would.
Quite a number of items on your list are a little bit of a new to rice, flour, beans, cement. Prices look relatively
flat.
Neuter, yes, including palm oil and sugar. Maybe with the exception of those that are a bit seasonal in terms of whether it's yam or whatever, tomato and all of that. Heard that Dangote's tomato plant in Kano State is back on stream.
Yes, we heard that. The question of Nigeria's competitiveness in tomato is one that arises now. I mean, how competitive are we in the production of tomato paste compared to, can you produce at a cost that is lower than the person who produces overseas? such that when he brings it in, your price competes with his, such that the government in an increasingly globalized world doesn't need to have any tariffs on tomato paste imports, so that you compete favorably against such imports.
Compete, don't try to. But again, let's okay. We'll keep checking in with this as soon as we have the final words on new minimum wage, when it is signed, and of course when it is paid.
Most importantly, when it is paid.
When it is paid.
Yes, it is.
Feel the money. But again, let's get back to the world of oil. It looks like we're seeing new highs we're heading towards 70. I never thought this would get this close, but we're getting that pretty close.
Yes, OPEC's output cut has been very effective. Yesterday, particularly, markets were buoyed by news of U.S. stockpilings growing by as much as 9.6 million barrels. There was the expectations were that the stockpiles would rise or fall by 300,000 barrels. So that swing from deficit of 300,000 to 9.6, that really buoyed markets. Then obviously the sanctions on Iran and Venezuela, news of continued compliance by OPEC members is up to 79%. Even if Nigeria is still one of the erring countries, we're still at about 1.74, and our quota is 1.69. So we have about 500,000 barrels to go. I mean, that's not...
But the NNPC says we're most likely going to meet our 2.3 for next year. That's what it's...
Let's maybe plans to ramp up production of condensates. Of oil condensate. So, but OPEC is very
on the
strict.
crude side.
Yes, OPEC is very strict on quotas, and its efforts, joint effort, has seen prices rise to where they are now. Without the joint effort, prices would not have risen. So it will compel its members.
Russia and China would need some compensation for cutting output, at least by price.
Yes.
Yes, Saudi Arabia is brought a lot of taking a lot of volume off the market.
Off the market.
So they need to get some compensation by price.
Yes. So
you need to compensate them somehow.
So at 68, I mean, so if at this point you're at 68, you're aiming for 70, you prepare prices stay between 70 and 75. So area members will be asked to fall in line or have face stiff consequences. So Nigeria is definitely going to fall in line in the coming months. By June, at the next meeting in June, I see there might be consequences if Nigeria doesn't.
I've not seen much of what are the big stories with the weather conditions as far as the agro-commodities concerns. You folks believe that wheat prices will be bullish in the coming weeks because of a strong supply from South America?
Yes, the South Americans have overshot production, whether it's because of, I think it's down to good weather conditions, and they overshot production, and the market is oversupplied.
Surprisingly good weather conditions over there in South America, but if you look at Europe, it's been a very tough year.
It's been tough. It's been unexpected.
Yes,
the cold has been more intense than it usually is at this time of the year. That has affected output and obviously boosted up prices of agro exports from Europe. There's also cocoa prices as Ghana and Ivory Coast, the two largest producers, as they come together there's news of them coming together and streamlining their outputs. That has given some support to prices, and Nigeria is one of the exporters of cocoa, so that's a good thing for us.
Okay, let's leave it there for today. Thank you very much for taking us through what's making the headlines in the world of commodities, and of course all of that will come into your new minimum wage. Just a minute. Let's say good morning to Temple Ashaju, business correspondent at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Temple will be joining us to take us through the market. It's going to be the fourth trading day. The market is opening. So our first call will be a good morning to him later on the show. But the big story is still around tax. Of course, the budget on one side, but again, the tax at all levels. But while we discuss the VAT and the corporate income tax, the multinationals have a lot to do in the conversation. That's what Anderson Tax folks talked about yesterday. We'll bring you a bit of that when we return.